It was a chilly morning in Los Angeles, and the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. Marcus Johnson stood outside Terminal 4 of Los Angeles International Airport, clutching his leather briefcase tightly. He had woken up early that day, excited about his upcoming business trip to New York City. For years, Marcus had worked tirelessly to build his tech startup from scratch, pouring every ounce of energy into making it a success. Now, at 38 years old, he was finally reaping the rewards of his hard work. His company was thriving, and he had earned enough to treat himself to small luxuries like flying first class. Marcus adjusted his tie as he made his way through security. He liked traveling in first class because it gave him time to relax before diving into meetings or presentations. It was also a symbol of how far he'd come, a reminder that all his sacrifices had paid off. After passing through security, Marcus stopped briefly at a coffee shop inside the terminal to grab an espresso. He checked his watch. There was still plenty of time before boarding began. As he sipped his coffee, he thought about the meeting he had scheduled later that afternoon with potential investors. This could be a big step forward for his company. When it was finally time to board, Marcus walked confidently toward Gate 27. Clutching his boarding pass, he smiled politely at the gate agent who scanned it without a second glance. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Johnson," she said cheerfully. Marcus nodded and headed down the jet bridge, eager to settle into his seat. First class was located near the front of the plane, and as soon as he stepped inside, he felt the familiar comfort of spacious seating and soft lighting. He slid into his assigned window seat, stowed his carry-on bag under the seat in front of him, and pulled out his phone to reply to a few emails while waiting for takeoff. But then something unexpected happened. Just as Marcus was getting comfortable, a flight attendant approached him with a clipboard in hand. She looked nervous but professional, her smile tight and forced. "Excuse me, sir," she said quietly, leaning down slightly so only he could hear. "We're going to need you to move to economy class." Marcus blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with disbelief. "This is my seat. I booked first class." The flight attendant hesitated, glancing around as if searching for support. Finally, she spoke again, her tone firmer this time. "Yes, sir, we understand that. However, another passenger has requested to sit here, and we've decided to accommodate them. We'll find you a suitable seat in economy." For a moment, Marcus simply stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. Was this some kind of joke? He had paid thousands of dollars for this ticket, not just for the extra legroom, but for the respect and service that came with it. And now they wanted him to give it up because someone else preferred it? "Who is this other passenger?" Marcus asked, his voice rising slightly despite his best efforts to stay composed. "Why should I have to move?" The flight attendant shifted uncomfortably. "It's, another traveler who prefers this section," she replied vaguely. Her eyes darted away, avoiding direct contact with him. Marcus frowned. Something didn't feel right about this situation. There was no logical reason why he should be asked to leave his seat. Unless it wasn't about logic at all. Slowly it dawned on him. The person requesting his seat must be white. That was the only explanation that made sense. Why else would they single him out like this? He took a deep breath, feeling anger simmer beneath the surface. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly, enunciating each word carefully. "You're asking me, a paying customer, to give up my seat because someone else wants it? Is that correct?" The flight attendant nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Marcus repeated, his voice growing louder now. "This isn't an inconvenience, this is discrimination." By this point, other passengers nearby had started to notice the commotion. A few heads turned curiously, whispering among themselves as they watched the exchange unfold. Some looked sympathetic, shaking their heads in disbelief, while others seemed indifferent. But Marcus didn't care about any of that. All he cared about was standing up for himself, for the principle of fairness. "I'm not moving," he declared firmly, crossing his arms over his chest. "If you want me to leave, you'll have to drag me out yourself." The flight attendant hesitated, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. After a tense pause, she excused herself and disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from the rest of the cabin. Moments later, a supervisor arrived, flanked by 2 additional crew members. They surrounded Marcus, their expressions unreadable but tinged with authority. "Mr. Johnson," the supervisor began, his tone clipped and official. "We apologize for the misunderstanding, but we really do need you to relocate. We've already arranged a seat for you in economy class." "No," Marcus shot back immediately. "I'm not going anywhere until you explain why I'm being treated this way. Show me the policy that allows you to kick me out of my seat for no valid reason." The supervisor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by Marcus's refusal to back down. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, after exchanging a quick glance with the flight attendant, he sighed heavily. "Very well," he said finally. "If you refuse to cooperate, we will have no choice but to call airport security." Security? Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was this really happening? He felt his heart pounding in his chest as he weighed his options. On one hand, he knew he was in the right. No reasonable argument existed to justify removing him from his seat. On the other hand, he didn't want to escalate things further and risk missing his flight entirely. Still, something inside him refused to budge. If he gave in now, what message would that send? That it was okay to treat people unfairly based on the color of their skin? As the standoff continued, tension filled the air. Other passengers began openly watching the scene unfold, murmuring amongst themselves. One elderly woman seated nearby leaned forward and whispered loudly, "This is ridiculous. Let the man keep his seat." Another passenger chimed in, agreeing with her. Even some of the flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the direction things were heading. Finally, after several minutes of heated discussion, Marcus relented, not because he agreed with their decision, but because he realized staying put wouldn't change anything. Reluctantly, he gathered his belongings and followed the crew member to his new seat in economy class. As he squeezed past rows of curious faces, he couldn't help but feel humiliated. What should have been a routine flight had turned into a degrading ordeal, one that left him questioning everything about the world he lived in. Back in his cramped seat near the rear of the plane, Marcus stared out the window, replaying the events in his mind. How could something like this happen in 2023? Hadn't society moved past such blatant displays of prejudice? He clenched his fists, determined to fight back, not just for himself, but for anyone else who might face similar treatment in the future. Little did he know, this incident was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would spark outrage across the nation and force people to confront uncomfortable truths about race, privilege, and justice. When the plane finally touched down in New York City, Marcus Johnson stepped off feeling a mix of exhaustion and simmering anger. The flight had been long and uncomfortable, not just because of the cramped economy class seat, but because of the weight of what had happened earlier. As he walked through the terminal, dragging his carry-on behind him, he couldn't shake the image of those passengers watching silently as he was escorted out of first class. It wasn't just an insult to him personally, it felt like a slap in the face to anyone who looked like him. By the time Marcus reached his hotel room later that evening, his emotions were boiling over. He tossed his bag onto the bed and sank into a chair, staring blankly at the wall. What could he do? Should he let it go and move on, chalking it up to yet another example of racial bias in everyday life? Or should he speak out and demand accountability? After all, this wasn't the first time something like this had happened to someone. Only now it had happened to him. And Marcus wasn't the kind of person to stay silent when faced with injustice. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus opened his laptop and began typing. At first, it was just a stream of consciousness rant, a way for him to vent his frustration. But as the words flowed onto the screen, he realized he had something important to say. He wrote about how he'd been humiliated in front of dozens of people simply because of the color of his skin. He described the dismissive attitude of the airline staff and their refusal to provide any logical explanation for their actions. Then he included photos of his boarding pass and screenshots of emails confirming his first-class booking. By the end of it, Marcus had crafted a powerful post that captured not only his personal experience, but also the broader issue of systemic racism in America. Before hitting publish, Marcus hesitated. Sharing this story meant putting himself under a microscope. People would judge him, criticize him, maybe even attack him online. But then he thought about others who might be going through similar experiences, people who didn't have the platform or resources to fight back. If sharing his story could help bring attention to these issues, wasn't it worth it? With a deep breath, he clicked the button and posted it on Twitter. Within minutes, responses started pouring in. At first, it was just friends and acquaintances, offering support. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Marcus," one comment read. "This is outrageous," said another. But soon, strangers began chiming in too, expressing outrage and solidarity. One user wrote, "This is exactly why we still have work to do. Racism isn't dead, it's alive and well." Another added, "How can airlines get away with treating black travelers like this? This is unacceptable." As the hours passed, the post gained momentum. Retweets skyrocketed, and hashtags like Ciao Justice for Marcus and Yar First Class Racism began trending across social media platforms. People shared memes mocking the airline, while others recounted their own stories of discrimination during travel. Some uploaded videos explaining why incidents like this mattered, while activists used the moment to highlight ongoing struggles against racial inequality. Before long, Marcus's name became synonymous with the growing movement calling for change. News outlets quickly picked up the story, amplifying its reach even further. Major networks sent reporters to interview Marcus, asking him to recount every detail of the incident. Local newspapers ran headlines like "Black CEO removed from first class sparks outcry" and "Airline faces backlash over racial bias allegations." Even late-night talk show hosts weighed in, using humor to underscore the absurdity of the situation. One comedian joked, "So let me get this straight. If I'm white and I see a black guy in first class, I can just ask for his seat?" Signed, Me up. Amidst the chaos, the airline scrambled to respond. Initially, they released a vague statement apologizing for any inconvenience caused, but stopped short of acknowledging the racial undertones of the incident. "We value all our customers equally and regret if Mr. Johnson felt otherwise," the statement read. To many, this response came across as tone-deaf and insincere. Critics pointed out that the airline hadn't addressed the core issue: why Marcus was removed in the first place. Was it truly about accommodating another passenger, or was it rooted in prejudice the backlash intensified? Customers began canceling flights with the airline, vowing never to fly with them again. Influencers encouraged boycotts, urging their followers to choose competitors instead. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to engage with his supporters online, thanking them for standing by him and reiterating his commitment to fighting for justice. In interviews, he emphasized that this wasn't just about him. It was about holding institutions accountable for perpetuating discriminatory practices. Despite the overwhelming support, not everyone agreed with Marcus's stance. Some critics argued that he was blowing the incident out of proportion. "It's just a seat," one commenter wrote. "Why make such a big deal out of it?" Others accused him of seeking attention or playing the victim card. These comments stung, but Marcus refused to let them derail him. Instead, he responded with grace and clarity, explaining that the issue went beyond a single seat. It was about dignity, respect, and equal treatment. As days turned into weeks, the controversy showed no signs of slowing down. Protesters gathered outside the airline's headquarters holding signs that read "Stop Racism in the Skies" and "Black Lives Matter in Business Class Too." Celebrities joined the conversation, using their platforms to amplify Marcus's message. One famous actor tweeted, "If you think this doesn't happen every day, you're living in denial. Stand with Marcus." Another singer posted a video of herself singing a protest song dedicated to the cause. Behind the scenes, Marcus worked tirelessly to keep the momentum going. He connected with civil rights organizations, brainstorming ways to turn public outrage into tangible action. Together, They drafted petitions demanding stricter regulations for airlines and greater transparency in handling complaints of discrimination. They also called for diversity training programs to educate employees about unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. For Marcus, this wasn't just about punishing the airline. It was about creating lasting change. But the pressure took its toll. Despite his outward confidence, Marcus struggled with the emotional weight of being thrust into the spotlight. He received countless messages daily, from people praising him for his courage to anonymous trolls spewing hate. Some comments were downright vicious, accusing him of lying or fabricating the story for publicity. At times, Marcus wondered if speaking out had been the right decision. Would things ever go back to normal? Could he return to focusing on his business without constantly reliving the trauma of that day? Still, Marcus reminded himself why he had started this journey in the first place. Yes, it was painful and exhausting, but it was also necessary. Every retweet, every share, every conversation sparked by his story brought society one step closer to addressing the deep-rooted issues of racism and privilege. And though he couldn't predict where this path would lead, Marcus knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't stop fighting until real change happened. By the end of the second week, the hashtag #JusticeForMarcus had been used millions of times, worldwide. Schools incorporated the story into lessons about racial equality, while corporations held internal discussions about workplace bias. Even politicians referenced the incident in speeches, pledging to push for reforms in the aviation industry. What had started as a humiliating experience for one man had blossomed into a global movement, one that refused to be ignored. And through it all, Marcus remained steadfast, determined to ensure that no one else would endure what he had gone through. Little did he know, the airline itself was about to make a shocking decision, one that would reignite the debate and test whether true accountability was possible. The storm surrounding Marcus Johnson's removal from first class had reached a fever pitch. Public outrage showed no signs of slowing down, and the pressure on the airline to take decisive action was mounting by the day. Internally, executives were scrambling to contain the fallout. The incident wasn't just a PR nightmare. It was a crisis that threatened the very reputation of the company. For an airline built on promises of luxury and customer satisfaction, being labeled as discriminatory was the last thing they needed. In a sleek boardroom at the airline's headquarters, top-level executives gathered for an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with tension as each person flipped through stacks of documents detailing the events of that fateful flight. Screens displayed graphs showing plummeting stock prices, canceled reservations, and hashtags trending across social media platforms. At the head of the table sat Sarah Collins, the airline's CEO, her face etched with worry. This was her worst nightmare, a situation spiraling out of control with no clear solution in sight. "We need answers," Sarah said firmly, breaking the silence. "Not excuses. Why did this happen? Who made the call to remove Mr. Johnson? And why wasn't protocol followed?" Her question hung heavy in the air. No one dared to answer immediately. Finally, a senior manager cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the footage from the flight attendant's body cameras," he began, cautiously. "And, well, it's worse than we thought." "Worse?" Sarah repeated, raising an eyebrow. "How much worse could it possibly be?" The manager hesitated before continuing. "Some of the crew members involved, the ones who escorted Mr. Johnson out, were heard making racially insensitive remarks during the incident, not directly to him but among themselves. Comments like, 'He should know his place' and 'First class isn't meant for people like him.'" A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even those hardened by years in corporate leadership couldn't hide their shock. Sarah leaned back in her chair, pinching the bridge of her nose. She knew this revelation would only fuel the firestorm outside if it ever got leaked. But more importantly, it confirmed what many had suspected all along. This wasn't just a case of poor judgment or miscommunication. It was systemic bias, ingrained in some corners of the organization. "What about the supervisor?" Sarah asked sharply. "The one who authorized moving Mr. Johnson. What does she have to say for herself? She claims she was following orders, another executive, chimed in. But when pressed, she admitted there was no formal policy allowing passengers to request someone else's seat based on preference. She said she acted because the other traveler insisted, and because she didn't want to cause a scene. Sarah shook her head in disbelief. So instead of standing up for our own passenger, we caved to someone else's demands? That's not how we operate, or at least it shouldn't be. The conversation shifted to damage control. Everyone agreed that something drastic needed to be done, not just to appease the public, but to send a message internally that discrimination wouldn't be tolerated. After hours of heated debate, a decision was reached. The airline would terminate several employees involved in the incident, including the supervisor and key members of the flight crew. It was a bold move, intended to demonstrate accountability, but it came with risks. Firing low-level workers might satisfy angry customers, but critics could argue it let higher-ups off the hook without addressing deeper institutional problems. News of the firings broke within days. Headlines blared across newspapers and websites. Airline fires crew involved in first-class racial bias incident. While some praised the move as a step toward justice, others questioned whether it went far enough. Activists pointed out that punishing individual employees did little to address the root causes of racism within the company. One commentator wrote, "Firing a few workers doesn't fix a broken system. Real change requires examining hiring, practices, training programs, and leadership structures." For Marcus, the news brought mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt vindicated. The airline was finally acknowledging that what happened to him was wrong and taking steps to hold people accountable. But on the other hand, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. These were real people losing their jobs, livelihoods shattered, because of actions taken or not taken in a high-pressure moment. Was firing them the best way to create lasting change? Or was it simply a knee-jerk reaction designed to placate public opinion? As the controversy raged on, Marcus found himself reflecting on the bigger picture. He understood the importance of consequences. After all, accountability was crucial for progress. But he also believed in second chances in education. If the goal was to prevent incidents like this from happening again, wouldn't it make more sense to focus on teaching employees how to recognize and combat bias rather than punishing them after the fact? Determined to channel his energy into something positive, Marcus decided to reach out to the airline directly. Through his lawyer, he sent a letter proposing a partnership. Instead of pursuing legal action, he offered to collaborate on developing comprehensive diversity and inclusion initiatives. His vision was simple yet ambitious: create mandatory training programs for all staff, from gate agents to pilots, focusing on unconscious bias, cultural competence, and conflict resolution. He also suggested forming advisory boards consisting of diverse voices to oversee implementation and ensure accountability. To everyone's surprise, the airline accepted his proposal. Executives saw it as an opportunity to rebuild trust, not just with Marcus but with the public at large. They announced the partnership in a press release, framing it as a commitment to fostering a more inclusive environment for all travelers. The announcement drew widespread praise, with many applauding both parties for choosing collaboration over confrontation. Over the next few months, Marcus worked closely with the airline's HR department and external consultants to design the new training modules. He attended workshops, shared personal anecdotes, and provided feedback on draft materials. Though challenging at times, the process gave him hope. He saw glimpses of genuine understanding among employees who had never considered how their words or actions might affect others. Slowly but surely, attitudes began to shift. One particularly memorable session took place at a regional training center. A group of flight attendants listened intently as Marcus recounted his experience, describing the humiliation and frustration he'd felt that day. When he finished speaking, a young attendant raised her hand tentatively. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," she said softly. "I can't imagine what it must have been like. But hearing your story makes me realize how important it is to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are." Her honesty moved Marcus deeply. For the first time since the incident, he felt optimistic about the future. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but moments like this reminded him why he had chosen to fight, not out of anger, but out of hope. Still, challenges remained. Some employees resisted the new initiatives, viewing them as unnecessary or overly political. Others expressed skepticism, wondering if these efforts were merely performative gestures aimed at salvaging the airline's image. Marcus knew better than anyone that transforming an entire organization wouldn't be easy. But he also knew that even small victories mattered. Every employee trained, every policy updated, every conversation started brought society one step closer to equality. The year drew to a close. Marcus reflected on everything that had transpired. From the humiliating ordeal on the plane to the global movement it sparked, his journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet through it all, he had discovered something profound. True strength lies not in holding on to anger, but in using it to drive meaningful change. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Marcus was ready to keep pushing forward. For himself, for others, and for a world where everyone could travel with dignity, regardless of the color of their skin. Little did he know, this chapter was far from over. The lessons learned and relationships forged during this tumultuous period would pave the way for even greater opportunities and challenges in the months to come. Months had passed since Marcus Johnson's life was turned upside down by the incident on the plane, but its impact lingered in ways he could never have imagined. What began as a humiliating experience had evolved into something much larger, a catalyst for change that resonated far beyond the walls of the airline or even the aviation industry. Marcus found himself at the center of a national conversation about race, privilege, and accountability, his name now synonymous with resilience and determination to fight systemic bias. As the diversity training programs rolled out across the airline, Marcus became more than just an advocate. He transformed into a symbol of hope for marginalized communities everywhere. Invitations poured in from organizations, universities, and conferences eager to hear him speak. His story inspired others to share their own experiences of discrimination, sparking dialogues that were long overdue. For Marcus, this newfound platform came with both challenges and opportunities. He knew he couldn't single-handedly dismantle centuries of inequality, but he could use his voice to push society closer to fairness and justice. One crisp morning in early spring, Marcus stood backstage at a major tech conference in San Francisco. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as attendees filed in, many clutching notebooks and pens, ready to absorb wisdom from one of the most talked-about figures of the year. As he adjusted his tie and took a deep breath, Marcus felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This wasn't just another speaking engagement. It was a chance to address some of the brightest minds in the tech world, people who had the power to influence industries and shape policies. When Marcus stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. He smiled warmly, waving briefly before stepping up to the podium. "Thank you," he began, his voice steady and calm. "I'm honored to be here today. But let me start by saying this. I didn't ask for any of this. No one asks to be treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. Yet when it happens, we are faced with a choice to stay silent or to stand up." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him. Marcus went on to recount his experience on the flight, the humiliation, the frustration, and the anger, but also the lessons he learned along the way. He spoke about the importance of calling out injustice, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky. "Silence is complicity," he said firmly. "If we don't speak up when we see wrongdoing, we allow it to continue unchecked. And trust me, staying quiet doesn't protect you. It only empowers those who perpetuate harm." His words struck a chord with the audience. Many nodded in agreement, while others scribbled notes furiously. Marcus then shifted gears, focusing on solutions rather than problems. "Change isn't easy," he admitted. "It requires effort, patience, and sometimes sacrifice. But it's worth it. Every policy rewritten, every employee trained, every leader held accountable brings us closer to a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect." After the speech, Marcus was swarmed by attendees eager to thank him or ask questions. Some shared their own stories of discrimination, tears streaming down their faces as they recounted moments of pain and resilience. Others expressed gratitude for giving them the courage to confront biases in their workplaces. One young woman approached him hesitantly, her hands trembling as she extended a business card. "Mr. Johnson," she said softly, "your story saved me. I almost quit my job after being passed over for a promotion because of my race. Hearing you talk made me realize I deserve better, and that I can demand it." Moments like these reminded Marcus why he kept pushing forward despite the exhaustion and criticism. Each person he inspired fueled his determination to keep fighting, not just for himself but for future generations. Back home, Marcus continued working closely with the airline to refine their diversity initiatives. Together they launched a series of town hall meetings where employees could voice concerns, ask questions, and suggest improvements. These sessions revealed surprising insights. Some workers confessed they hadn't realized how certain actions or comments could be perceived as discriminatory, while others admitted feeling powerless to challenge prejudiced behavior among colleagues. By creating safe spaces for open dialogue, the airline began fostering a culture of transparency and mutual respect. But not everything went smoothly. Resistance persisted, particularly from older employees who viewed the changes as unnecessary or overly political. During one heated town hall, a veteran pilot stood up and declared, "We've been flying planes for decades without all this diversity nonsense. Why fix what isn't broken?" Marcus listened patiently before responding. "Because it is broken," he said gently but firmly. "Just because something hasn't been challenged doesn't mean it's working. We owe it to ourselves and to our passengers to do better." His response earned applause from many in the room, signaling a gradual shift in attitudes. Slowly but surely, skeptics began to see the value of inclusivity, not as a threat to tradition, but as an enhancement to excellence. Pilots started volunteering to lead discussions on cultural competence, while flight attendants formed support groups to help each other navigate difficult situations. Even senior executives embraced the changes, recognizing that a diverse workforce wasn't just morally right but also good for business. Amidst these developments, Marcus received an unexpected invitation, one that would test his ability to forgive and collaborate. The airline's CEO, Sarah Collins, reached out personally, asking to meet face-to-face. At first, Marcus hesitated. Could he trust her sincerity after everything that had happened? After consulting with close friends and advisors, he decided to give her a chance. If nothing else, it might provide insight into how leadership viewed the situation. The meeting took place in a quiet cafe near Marcus's office. Sarah arrived promptly, dressed in a tailored suit and carrying a folder filled with documents. She greeted him warmly, though her eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Johnson," she said, extending her hand. "I know there's no excuse for what happened to you, but I want you to know we're committed to making things right." Marcus studied her carefully before nodding. "I appreciate that," he replied. "But actions speak louder than words. Show me what you're doing differently." Sarah opened the folder and handed him a report detailing recent progress. Increased representation of minorities in leadership roles, partnerships with community organizations to promote diversity in hiring, and plans to expand training programs globally. She also proposed a new initiative, a scholarship fund for underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation. "We'd like to name it after you," she added hesitantly, "as a tribute to your courage and leadership." For a moment, Marcus sat silently, processing the information. He appreciated the gesture, but he wanted to ensure the airline's efforts extended beyond symbolic gestures. "This is a good start," he said finally. "But remember, real change takes time. It's not about ticking boxes. It's about creating lasting impact." Sarah nodded earnestly. "That's exactly what we're aiming for. We're in this for the long haul." Their conversation marked the beginning of a tentative yet productive relationship. Over the following months, Marcus worked closely with Sarah and her team to implement additional reforms, including stricter guidelines for handling passenger complaints and regular audits to monitor progress. Though challenges remained, The partnership demonstrated that accountability and collaboration could coexist, even in the aftermath of conflict. As the year drew to a close, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come, from the humiliation of being removed from first class to becoming a beacon of hope for millions. His journey had been anything but predictable. Yet through it all, he had discovered something profound. True strength lies not in holding on to bitterness, but in using adversity to drive meaningful change. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Marcus was ready to keep pushing forward, for himself, for others, and for a world where everyone could travel with dignity, regardless of the color of their skin. Little did he know, the final chapter of this story was still unwritten. The lessons learned and relationships forged during this tumultuous period would pave the way for even greater opportunities and challenges in the months to come. A year had passed since Marcus Johnson's life was forever changed by the incident on that fateful flight. What began as a deeply personal humiliation had grown into a movement that touched countless lives, sparking conversations about race, privilege, and accountability in ways no one could have predicted. For Marcus, the journey had been both exhausting and transformative. It wasn't just about standing up for himself. It was about standing up for everyone who felt marginalized or overlooked. As spring turned to summer, Marcus found himself reflecting on how much had shifted, not only within the airline but across industries and communities. The diversity training programs he helped design were now mandatory for all employees at the airline, from ground staff to pilots. Feedback from participants showed promising results. Many reported feeling more aware of unconscious biases and better equipped to handle difficult situations involving discrimination. The company also implemented new policies ensuring that passenger complaints would be handled transparently and fairly, with independent oversight to prevent similar incidents in the future. But perhaps the most significant change came in the form of representation. Inspired by Marcus's advocacy, the airline launched an initiative to recruit and promote more diverse candidates into leadership roles. Women of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and other underrepresented groups began rising through the ranks, bringing fresh perspectives and ideas to the table. One such leader was Lisa Monroe, a former flight attendant who had risen to become the airline's first black female vice president of customer experience. "Marcus didn't just open doors for us," Lisa said during a televised interview. "He reminded us that we belong here and that our voices matter." The ripple effects extended beyond the airline industry. Corporations in tech, finance, healthcare, and education began reaching out to Marcus, seeking guidance on implementing their own diversity initiatives. Universities invited him to deliver keynote speeches, while nonprofits partnered with him to amplify their efforts toward racial equity. His story became a case study in classrooms, inspiring students to think critically about systemic inequality and their role in addressing it. Even Hollywood took notice, with producers optioning his life rights to develop a film based on his experiences, a testament to the universal resonance of his fight for justice. Despite these successes, Marcus remained grounded. He knew that progress was fragile and required constant vigilance. During a panel discussion at a civil rights summit, he addressed this reality head-on. "Change doesn't happen overnight," he told the audience. "It's not enough to create policies or hold workshops. We have to keep showing up day after day, challenging ourselves and others to do better. Real equality is a marathon, not a sprint." One of the most meaningful developments occurred when the airline unveiled the scholarship fund named in Marcus's honor. Designed to support underrepresented students pursuing careers in aviation, the program quickly gained traction, attracting applications from aspiring pilots, engineers, and flight attendants nationwide. At the inaugural award ceremony, Marcus stood beside a young woman named Jasmine Carter, the first recipient of the scholarship. Her eyes sparkled with determination as she thanked him for paving the way. "You showed me that my dreams are valid," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And because of you, I know I can achieve them." Moments like these reaffirmed Marcus's belief in the power of resilience and community. Yet he also recognized that challenges remained. Not everyone embraced the changes brought about by his advocacy. Some critics accused him of being too soft on the airline, arguing that firing low-level employees while leaving top executives untouched amounted to scapegoating. Others dismissed diversity initiatives as mere performative activism, claiming they lacked substance. Marcus understood these concerns and acknowledged the need for continued scrutiny, but he also believed in giving credit where it was due. "It's easy to point fingers," he once remarked during an interview. "What's harder, and more important, is finding solutions. Yes, there's still work to be done, but dismissing progress because it's imperfect does nothing to move us forward. Let's celebrate wins, learn from mistakes, and keep building bridges instead of walls." For Marcus, the true measure of success lay not in accolades or recognition, but in the tangible impact of his efforts. He saw it in the smiles of passengers treated with dignity, in the confidence of employees empowered to speak up, and in the dreams of students inspired to soar. Each small victory reminded him why he had chosen to fight, not out of anger but out of hope. By the end of the year, Marcus decided to take a step back from the spotlight. While he remained committed to advocacy, he wanted to focus on rebuilding aspects of his life that had taken a backseat during the whirlwind of the past months. His tech startup, which had weathered the storm thanks to a dedicated team, was thriving again. New projects were underway, and Marcus looked forward to channeling his energy into innovation and growth. At the same time, he made space for personal healing, spending weekends hiking with friends, reconnecting with family, and rediscovering hobbies he'd neglected. Still, Marcus couldn't escape the legacy of what had happened. Whenever he boarded a plane, he noticed subtle differences in how he was treated, not just by airline staff but by fellow passengers. People approached him respectfully, some even thanking him for his courage, though it was bittersweet to realize how much work still needed to be done. Marcus appreciated the progress. Every act of kindness served as proof that change was possible. On a crisp autumn morning, Marcus found himself seated in first class once again. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant greeted him warmly, calling him by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Johnson," she said with a genuine smile. "We're glad to have you flying with us today." For a moment, Marcus simply sat there, letting the weight of those words sink in. It wasn't just about the seat. It was about respect, acknowledgement, and belonging. As the plane soared above the clouds, Marcus gazed out the window, lost in thought. He thought about the long road he had traveled, from the humiliation of being removed from his rightful place to becoming a symbol of resilience and justice. He thought about the countless people who had supported him along the way, as well as those who had doubted or criticized him. Most of all, he thought about the future, a world where stories like his wouldn't make headlines because they simply wouldn't happen anymore. Marcus smiled softly to himself, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Through adversity, he had discovered strength. Through pain, he had found purpose. And though the fight for equality was far from over, Marcus knew one thing for certain: every step forward mattered. As the plane descended toward its destination, Marcus closed his eyes, savoring the quiet hum of the engines. Somewhere below, a new chapter awaited, one filled with possibilities, challenges, and opportunities to continue making a difference. Whatever lay ahead, Marcus was ready. After all, he had already proven that courage and perseverance could overcome even the greatest obstacles. And in doing so, he had shown the world that no injustice, no matter how small it might seem, was too insignificant to ignite a movement.